Today's plenary session is about local and state success stories. Got to tell you, I'm really looking forward to it because in my day-to-day job, when the phone rings, it's not usually a success story. Now, this session is being sponsored by the Wood people. And just before we get to them, I want to say that please look in the chat box for a link to a survey for TMAC. This is a survey about how to do measured representations of risk. And FEMA is looking for our ASFPM membership to give them feedback before they do that. Now, Steve No works for a company called Wood. We do some flood mapping contracts with a lot of great engineering firms in Kansas, and we do contracts with Wood. So I'm looking forward to hearing this and finding out what's going on. And in case you don't know him, Steve's a decent cook too. All right. Have that Wood video.
Wow. We've made it to day 3, plenary session, 11 o'clock. Great conference. New things, new ways to look at things, and that's one of the reasons that I always look forward to this conference. Hopefully by next year, we'll get back to the normal. I'll actually get to wear my yellow Wood shirt and hand out drink tickets at the opening exhibit hall. But hats off to ASFPM. They've done a fantastic job of rolling out the new data. This is our one time out of the year where we get to expose to what everybody, all the new ideas and all the fancy things that we're doing. We're also very fortunate at Wood to have our production teams across the nation to be involved in flood risk across the nation. And in doing that, we're seeing a shift in things. There are a lot of folks that are getting some updated, very good flood risk data, as well as there's lots of communities out there that's going to have flood risk data here in the near future that's never had it. Think about that. Communities that's never had access to the definition of flood risk. What an opportunity to educate, get them to respect the risk, as well as come up with good ways to resolve and fix that risk. We are at a very changing time. I think over the next 3 to 5 years, you may see this plenary session end up being a whole day, local successes, because as we get these new communities involved in the flood risk process, opportunity is unlimited. We're only limited by our abilities to educate, display the risk, and get the communities engaged. And I can tell you, based on the people that are associated with this industry, and in particular with ASFPM, they'll meet the challenge. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Steve, and thanks for the opportunity to sponsor this session.
Oh, well, thank you for being our sponsor. Now, our next speaker is Paul Osman, and Paul sent me his bio. It's only about 5 or 6 pages long, but he's a really interesting guy, but I only have time to read a part of it. So Paul Osman has recently retired as the statewide floodplain programs chief for the Illinois Office of Water Resources. For over 30 years, he coordinated floodplain development regulations as well as the National Flood Insurance Program for nearly 1,000 Illinois communities. His duties also included assisting with floodplain mapping, flood disaster response, and flood mitigation activities in Illinois. Prior to joining OWR, Paul was a resource conservationist for several years in northwestern Kenya. Paul is a graduate of Augustana College and has done graduate studies in geology and resource management at Illinois State University. Paul has served on the board of directors for both the National and Illinois Associations of Floodplain Managers, has served as National Flood Insurance Committee co-chair for ASFPM, has testified in Congress on floodplain issues, and has served on many national and international task forces. Paul is a proud recipient of Illinois Association Lifetime Achievement Award and holds an honorary citizenship in several Illinois communities, along with a guy named Abraham Lincoln. Paul currently owns P.OZ Consulting LLC, so P.Oz. And take it away, Paul.
Well, good morning, everyone, or I guess good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. I'm glad to be here today talking about mutual aid teams. Of course, we can't talk about mutual aid without a reference to Bill and Ted's Great Adventure, because the theme of that movie is kind of the overriding theme of mutual aid programs, and that's be excellent to each other. So let's jump right in here. All the experts tell you when you do a presentation that you're supposed to start with a bold opening statement and then provide some solutions to that statement. Damage assessments suck. I know that's crude, it's unprofessional, it's kind of shocking, but there's actually no better word for damage assessments. They stink. They're hands down the worst thing for local officials. Now, I understand that a lot of people on this call have done damage assessments and know what damage assessments are. But for those of you that don't know what substantial damage is and what damage assessments are, let me take the 4-hour FEMA class and summarize it down into 30 seconds here. So damage assessments are the 50% rule. A lot of people call them the 50% rule. And what that means is that if your structure is damaged from any source, flood, fire, tornado, hurricanes, aliens, attacks, it doesn't matter. But if your structure is in the floodplain is damaged, where the damages exceed 50% of the market value, then the structure must be brought into compliance with floodplain regulations. So in other words, elevated or flood-proofed. A lot of communities in the nation track cumulative substantial damage, which means they add up those damages over a period of years, usually 10 years. And at the point they reach 50%, then that structure must be brought into compliance with current floodplain regulations. So nationwide, most communities do a really good job at this. Many communities do a good job. You can see the top series of slides there, a structure. This is just north of St. Louis on the Mississippi River, a structure that was substantially damaged in 2017. You can go to Google Earth and look at that structures today, and you can see that they're all elevated. Unfortunately, other communities, well, they don't do such a good job, and it's become a problem. So the bottom series of slides, I'm not going to tell you where this is, but the 4 pickup trucks in the front yard should be a little bit of a clue. You can see the red line there. That house probably had 5 or 6 feet of water. The red line is the high water mark. When I dropped into Google Earth Street View and looked at this structure, lo and behold, it had been rebuilt and reoccupied in 2020, which of course means it's going to flood again at some point. So damage assessments are hands down a floodplain manager's worst day. They have to be done. They're not an option. You have to do damage assessments after a structure is damaged. And they have to be done quickly. We like to say that you need to get in and do those damage assessments while the carp is still flopping on the couch. They have to be done quickly. And they're horrible. They're both for the people doing them and the people getting them. It's an awful day. And they're physically and emotionally demanding. It's hard to get out and do these damage assessments physically, and it's also emotionally hard just because of what you're doing. You're upsetting people's lives basically. And they can quickly overwhelm local officials. They almost always need a team. It's hard for one person to do this alone. And as we saw on the prior side, consistency and compliance remains elusive. But they are hands down the #1 most effective action that a community can take to reduce repetitive losses. So in 2014, Illinois had a major flood event. Most counties in the state of Illinois were declared a disaster area. And a lot of local officials were overwhelmed with the prospect of having to get these damage assessments done. Luckily, Illinois is blessed with a lot of excellent floodplain managers. So the Illinois Flood Association came together and we said, we need a disaster team to go out and help these local officials. We have 800 IFSM members. We have 500 certified floodplain managers. We have 50 damage assessment experts around the state. We had the resources to help these local officials. So as anyone on this call knows, the first order of business, anytime you're doing anything with FEMA, the first order of business is to have a good acronym. Before you start anything else with a program, you have to have an acronym. So we struggled with a team name. The first name we came up with was Flood Assistance Response Team. Of course, the acronym for that is a FART team. And we decided, we probably need to get a better name to that. Communities have enough problems. They don't need a FART team roaming around their community after a flood. So we came up with DAFT, FRAT, SHAFT. Lawyers got involved, and we had IFSM, ER, FRATATA 2.0 with a trademark. We rejected all those. And ultimately, what we came up with was a Rapid Assistance Flood Team, the RAFT team. The RAFT had good symbolism for a team coming in to offer assistance to a stranded local official. So we went with the RAFT team. So what is the Rapid Assistance Flood Team? It's IFSM members, it's Illinois Flood Association members. They're all certified floodplain managers. It's a cross section of professional disciplines. So there's floodplain managers, there's planners, there's architects, there's engineers, there's geologists, there's building officials. It's a cross section of different disciplines. But each one of these people are experienced and trained in post-flood responsibilities. They know the drill after a flood disaster. And each one of the members needs to be pre-approved by the IFSM Floodplain Management Committee. So in essence, they're volunteers who've agreed to assist other communities in times of need. They're good people. As a rule, they're good people. So the number one question that we get after disaster from communities is this going to cost my community? That's what everyone wants to know. And the answer is no. There's no cost at all for raft assistance. Raft members are volunteers. They volunteer their time, their equipment, their resources. They drive to the communities themselves. We all meet in the morning to help the community. The volunteers and the host communities both sign liability waivers. And there is a process to reimburse per diem and travel, but I can tell you that that has never been done to date. And each one of these volunteers does it out of their own kindness. So what we discovered in 4 deployments is that raft works. It works great. We've done 4 deployments. We've done 4 communities. Each one of those deployments were 1 day in and out, done in a day. We've done over 2,000 damage assessments. Of those 2,000 damage assessments, 300 of those structures have been mitigated. In our most recent deployment in Watsika, Illinois, we had 50 buildings that were substantially damaged. Of those, 49 have now been elevated and one's been torn down. And Watsika itself has now applied for a $5 million buyout project to acquire about 100 more of those flooded buildings. We even had one community, if you look in the upper right-hand corner, one community, Ottawa, Illinois, had the local microbrewery brew us an officially team beer, the Floodwater Brew, and they gave everybody on the raft team a growler full of this beer that we didn't do during the damage assessments, I might add. So I have talked a lot about Illinois here, and Illinois is not unique. There's teams in Florida, there's teams in Louisiana, there's teams in Oklahoma, and there's existing teams in South Carolina. And when all of us came together and talked about what we've learned, we all basically had the same lessons learned in our process here. First of all, it's easier and less stressful for the community. When you bring in outside experts to do the damage assessments, it relieves a huge stress load from those local officials. There's more of a personal and caring interaction with residents. So often you're interacting with residents when you're out doing field inspections or damage assessments. And if it's people from the own community or their own region, rather than around the nation, or rather than FEMA people, reservists, or contractors coming in, the help is typically accepted better if it's your neighboring community offering assistance. It provides a great scapegoat for the community. So the community can later say, well, this was a team of experts who knew what they were doing, and they came in and did these damage assessments. There was no personal issues. There was no political issues to deal with. These were outside experts that basically came in and just got the job done. They're quick. The damage assessment teams, you can get a call on Tuesday, and on Wednesday, you can be in that community doing damage assessments and assisting that community, which means that the community and the residents are on the express train to recovery. They don't have to wait weeks or months, or in some cases a year, to get those damage assessments done. They're able to plan accordingly and within the next day or two, be on the road to recovery. And this leads to better compliance and mitigation. So if everyone's got their damage assessments done at the same time, the community can focus on mitigation actions, they can focus on mitigation grants, and they can ensure compliance with that 50% rule that we talked about earlier. And it's a great way to train newbies. If you have new people, new local officials that want some experience doing damage assessments, invite them to come on the team. They can come along with you. They are always assigned to somebody who's experienced or somebody who's an expert. And it's a great way, once you're out in the field for a day, you really become an expert in doing damage assessments. They cost nothing. They cost nothing to the team. They cost nothing to the community. And then the most important thing, probably the thing that all of us agree is the best of this, is you gain more new friends than you know what to do with. Both the people on the team become really close, but also the communities that you're assisting inevitably end up joining the team for subsequent disasters or some subsequent deployments. So all of the teams have learned these same lessons, and we've all found these to be a huge success. So ASFPM took these lessons from all these other states, and that's led us now to kind of evolve this into a nationally based program. So ASFPM's efforts are to develop are to develop a national disaster response team. We're calling them DART teams, and try to develop these in every state in the nation so that there'll be uniformity. So let's talk a little bit about this national evolution. Why DARTs? Well, the existing teams have performed exceptionally well in all of their response. Despite what team it was, every single one of these state teams have responded to a lot of flood disasters, events from small floods to larger federally declared disasters, and they've all performed exceptionally well. At each one of these events, the local state teams usually responded within a day or two. They were able to get there quickly and get the work done. And on each deployment, these teams completed hundreds of damage assessments, and they did a lot of other types of work we're going to talk about in a minute here as well. And lastly, the communities and the DART members both loved them. But most importantly, these teams kind of exemplify what we as floodplain managers and what the association should be doing after a disaster. We should be helping each other. That's the sole purpose of an association. So what can DARTs do? The graphic here that you see is from the Louisiana FMA, their disaster team. And they do a lot of different things, but ultimately states and chapter teams will determine what capabilities and services they provide. But those services are pretty widespread. They can start out from field inspections, just going in and surveying high water marks, identifying mapping damaged areas, doing that initial triage on damaged structures. They can be data collection to go in and compile high water elevation maps or depth damage data. They can actually be in and going to doing the damage assessments like the Illinois team has done. The Oklahoma team does a lot of outreach and education, so they assist with education on post-disaster requirements. They've operated booths and kiosks. Some teams go in and help those local officials in the permit process, so they actually work the permit desk in that community to answer questions and issue the permits. They provide mitigation advice. They can collect the data needed to put together mitigation grants for the community. And then lastly, even the Louisiana team has a DART reconnaissance program, or a drone reconnaissance program, where they have a drone team that can go out and collect collect damage information, aerial imagery on damaged buildings. So again, there's a lot of activities, a lot of services that these teams can provide, but ultimately it's going to be up to the state team to decide which one of these services they want to provide. ASFPM has some clear expectations for what we'd like to see in these DART teams across the nation. First of all, we'd like to have locally driven teams within each state for quick response. So again, the teams are going to be driven locally by that state or chapter. The DART activities, as we talked about in the prior slide, the DART activities are going to be administered by the state or the chapter or both. So again, the chapters can decide what activities they want to perform. The DART volunteers are going to be trained by the chapters and states. ASFPM is going to have some oversight on this. We're going to develop training materials that you can use, but ultimately the training is going to be done by the chapters or states. We'd like to see more uniform enabling legislation within each state that allows for mutual aid. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. We'd like to see a memorandum of understanding between state emergency management agencies. We want to make sure that liability and reimbursement concerns are addressed. We need to have uniformity on training and logistics and qualifications so that all teams operate the same way. We want to take advantage of programs to reimburse mutual aid, such as Disaster Assistance Act, Section 1206. There's programs out there to reimburse DART teams. And then lastly, as we evolve into a national team, we want to have prepackaged mission-ready packages for interstate response. And this is typically done through the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes here. So as we looked at all these visions that we have for DART, we've kind of come up with what we'd like to call the DART pyramid. So kind of three main tiers that these states can evolve and develop into. And I'm going to talk about each one of these individually in a minute here. But at the bottom of that pyramid is smaller local events for state and chapter teams. At the middle of that pyramid is regional events that are coordinated closely through the state EMA. And at the top of that pyramid is large catastrophic events, which will be coordinated through the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, which already exists. So let's talk about each one of these tiers really quickly here. At the base of that pyramid, this is kind of the foundation of disaster assistance teams, is local chapter teams. And good examples of this are the teams in Illinois and Oklahoma. So there's no formal state or federal administrative process at these teams. They're administered by the chapters. The volunteers and the host communities both sign individual liability waivers. Usually the chapter and more often the state coordinator plays a major role in the logistical and administrative work for this team and setting up and getting it going. There's no reimbursement expectations, but because these are locally based, they're fast, efficient, and effective. As I talked about earlier, usually you can get a call on one day and the next day this team can actually be out in the field providing assistance. As we move up the pyramid to the middle, this is where the states coordinate closely with their state EMA, or the chapters coordinate with their state EMA. So a good example of this is Florida, where the DART assistance is formally requested through the county EMA. The county EMA then contacts the state EMA to coordinate the assistance. And this usually requires a memorandum of understanding between the DART team and the state EMA. So reimbursement issues, liability issues, all those other kind of logistical concerns are all addressed in the state memorandum of understanding. Florida, again, has an excellent example of this. They have a memorandum of understanding with their state building code association and also with the state EMA. And it addresses all those issues with reimbursement and liability. And with this middle of the tier, there's also potential reimbursement with federal declaration use and public assistance, again, DRRAA 1206. At the top of that pyramid is National Response Team and using the existing Emergency Management Assistance Compact. So a good example of this, probably the best team in the nation, is Louisiana, which has already set this up. So the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, that's a mouthful, EMAC, enables the sharing of services, personnel, equipment, and commodities between state EMAs. All 50 states in the nation are members of EMAC. So all of them have already joined EMAC, and the framework is already there for DART teams simply to form into this process that already exists. The reimbursement and liability issues are already covered by the EMAC agreement. They're already in there, they're already set up. All we need to do is develop detailed mission-ready packages that'll work under EMAC frameworks. So ASFPM is already working with EMAC to develop these mission-ready packages and have a template ready so that DART teams can use them across the nation to respond interstate actions with other states. But the key with this is going to be uniformity in training. So we're going to talk about that in a minute here. As we did our research on this, we discovered that state mutual aid legislation varies widely from state to state to state. There's no uniformity within the nation on mutual aid. And other assistance group, other mutual aid groups have discovered this same thing. It's kind of mind-boggling, the variety of mutual aid legislation that exists between states. If you look at the code, the key there on the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see opt-in, opt-out. So the difference in here, the green states are opt-out states, which means the state has already established a mutual aid program and communities need to opt out. If they don't want to participate, they actually formally have to opt out of that mutual aid program. Conversely, the lighter yellow states are opt-in states, which means the mutual aid program has been established by the state, but communities need to opt into that program. The darker shade of yellow, kind of the orangish yellow, are states that have individual compacts where communities sign individual compacts with each other. And then the pinkish reddish colored state, there's just 3 of them in the New England area there. There's no known program. So as we look at mutual aid legislation, we have to determine whether it's opt-out, opt-in. In some states, mutual aid is only limited to first responders or healthcare workers, which makes it difficult for a floodplain manager to kind of fall into that program. In most states, the EMAs, the emergency management officers, are unaware of floodplain regulations and the importance of substantial damage. So there's a learning curve where we need to work more closely with state EMAs and make them aware of the importance of both damage assessments and post-damage mitigation actions. And then the question remains, should all DART activities be coordinated with state EMAs? A lot of you are on the prior presentation to this, where Shanti Heil from Louisiana talked about a new portal that they've developed that lists every one of the states and shows what kind of mutual aid legislation they have. Those two links on the bottom right of this slide, geo.stantec.com, that National BCAT portal viewer, is an excellent resource to look in and see what your state has for mutual aid legislation. So I encourage you to do that. But training and development, training and DART development is going to be key. We need to have national consistency because uniformity is going to be the key to a successful national program. So whether it's Arizona responding to Vermont or Vermont responding to Arizona, we need to make sure that these teams all operate with uniformity and they all have the same professionalism when they're operating in other states. So ASFPM is working with FEMA, we're working with EMI, we're working with National Emergency Management Association to develop uniform substantial damage training, SDE training, EMAC training that DART teams can use. We're going to develop training for DART coordinators in each state so that the team coordinators will understand the team logistics and there'll be consistency. Again, the states are going to operate independently, but we still need to make sure that there's national consistency, regardless of what state is going anywhere in the nation. They need to operate with consistency and professionalism. Inevitably, the dreaded L word becomes an issue. There's always concern about liability risks. And what we've discovered in our research is that the dreaded L word is not really that scary. All DART volunteers will sign a liability waiver. All the host communities will sign a liability waiver. But existing state and federal mutual aid programs, almost all of them provide additional liability protection. And nearly every state in the nation already has liability protection built into their mutual aid enabling laws. So as we look into this, liability seems to be less of a concern than what we initially thought it would be. What about cost is the next question. DART members are all volunteers, so unless pre-arranged, travel and reimbursement, those sorts of things should not be an issue unless there's interstate mutual aid response. And in that case, existing reimbursement programs already exist through FEMA, through Section 1206, through EMAC. Most of those reimbursement and travel costs have been arranged through those existing mutual aid frameworks. So we have a lot of geography issues to overcome. This is going to be one of our biggest issues, is to ensure the national uniformity and consistency between teams. Whether it's scary river rats, scary politicians, or scary critters, damage assessments and local floodplain management varies from state to state, and we need to make sure that that's all done with consistency and professionalism. So what's next? We've done a lot of work so far, but we have a lot of work ahead of us. We've developed a DART playbook, and that playbook is going to be released soon. It's going through review right now. There's a website for DART teams that's being set up. It's called the DART board. You can go to the ASFPM website and look at that soon. That website's going to include templates, tools, and examples, and all the kind of templates you need to help set up a DART program in your state. We're going to have uniform training and logistics on that website. We're going to drop in all of our training materials on that. We're going to partner with the National Emergency Management Association. We've joined EMAC and we're developing national mission and ready packages that will be pre-prepared so they'll be ready in the event of a disaster so that states can respond interstate and help each other. We're going to coordinate DART activities at the national level at ASFPM, but at the same time, we want to ensure that there's independence and autonomy within those state teams. And lastly, we're soon going to start a pilot program with 8 states around the nation where we can start to set up these DART programs so that all those teams are consistent and uniform in how they operate. So that's a quick overview of the DART program. If you have questions, concerns, suggestions, here's the contact information for Bill Brown at ASFPM and my contact information as well. Feel free to get in touch with either one of us. And lastly, I need to give a big thanks to Shanti Howe with Louisiana Association because a lot of this work has already been done by Louisiana, and we relied heavily on Shanti to help us guide us through that process. So that's it for me, and I think we'll hold off for questions at the end. I'm not sure how this is going to work, but But Steve, it's all yours.
Well, I certainly enjoyed that presentation. Thank you, Paul. And I bet those of you who didn't run out the kitchen, make a sandwich, enjoyed it too. And you're going to enjoy this next one as well. Our next presenter is Kara Runsten from Massachusetts. She is the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Manager. That acronym is MVP, by the way. I love that acronym. At the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, where she administers the MVP grant program that provides support for cities and towns in Massachusetts in planning for climate change, resiliency, and implementing priority projects. Kara has experience working in government, consulting, nonprofit, philanthropic sectors. She holds a BA in public policy from Stanford University and a master in city planning from MIT. Let's hear Kara's video.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me here today. And thanks to the conference organizers for putting together this great program. My name is Kara Runsten. I run the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grant Program for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And that's out of the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. And I'm excited to talk to you a bit more about our climate resiliency grant program for our local communities. So I always like to start my presentation with this slide that kind of just gives some context about what we might see by the end of the century in Massachusetts, and also the rest of the country as well. So we are going to see some rising temperatures, changes in precipitation, sea level rise, and extreme weather. And we need to be taking action to prepare for all of these changes into the future. So this is our working definition of climate resilience from our Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness, which we call MVP for short. This is our definition from our team. So climate resilience is the ability of a community to address the needs of its built, social, and natural environment to anticipate, cope with, and rebound stronger from events and trends related to climate change hazards. And the key part here really is the proactive piece. So resilient communities don't just recover, they continuously build capacity to reduce the impacts of future climate events. This slide shows a bit of history about the program. So Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito have really taken a leadership role on climate change issues in the country. In 2016, they issued Executive Order 569, which is a comprehensive approach to both reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to prepare for the impacts of climate change. And this included a lot of kind of state level initiatives and also the need for municipal support, which is where the MVP program comes in. And then in 2018, Governor Baker signed the Environmental Bond Bill, and that authorized over $200 million for climate change adaptation, of which the MVP program was a piece of that. So the MVP program, again, is a state and local partnership. It's how, there's a lot of initiatives going on the state level, but also wanted that to be happening at the local level as well and providing support to our municipalities in that endeavor. We know there was a lot of need for this type of funding throughout Massachusetts. These are just some of the kind of things that definitely need to be prepared for climate change. We have over 300 high hazard dams in Massachusetts, over 12,000 culverts and small bridges that need replacement, and not just replacement, but upgrading for future conditions. And then we have about 1,100 municipally owned coastal structures that could be impacted by climate change. And so again, that was sort of the impetus behind this program. So the MVP program is actually two different grant programs in one. So we have the planning grant as well as the action grant. The planning grant is a smaller grant. It's about $15,000 to $35,000. And the end result of that process is a plan with prioritized actions that a community would want to take to prepare for the impacts of climate change in their community. So this is sort of the starting point of the MVP program. A community that hasn't had any involvement with MVP before would apply for a planning grant to create this type of plan. It's centered around stakeholder workshops, and I'll talk a little bit more about those later. It's roughly a 9-month process, and when they have that final report, they're designated as an MVP community and are eligible to apply for action grant funding. So action grants are open to MVP communities. Community can apply for up to $2 million per project, and the project can take place over 1 or 2 years. There is a 25% local match requirement for action grants. And we have about $10 million available per year for action grants. These types of grants can fund all kinds of different projects depending on the municipality's priorities. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the diversity of the projects that we get later on, so you can get a flavor of those. This slide shows a bit about the status of the MVP program to date. So we're really proud of the uptake. Over just a few years. We have 89% participation in the program. And that means that 89% of our communities have either already completed the planning process or are currently completing it. And that's represented by the shading in this map. And then for action grants, we have over 160 action grants that are represented by the dots here that have either already been completed or are ongoing. And we have awarded over $44 million to date through the program, both planning and action grants. And then in the past couple of years, we've hired a program manager, which is me. And then we also have 6 regional coordinators that are stationed in their region throughout the state. And they provide that kind of one-on-one technical assistance and support to communities on their MVP grants, and then just building resilience more broadly as well. So now I'll talk a little bit more about our planning grant process. So again, the planning grant process is sort of a prescribed process. It's based off of the community resilience building framework that is developed by the Nature Conservancy. Basically takes a community along a series of steps to creating this plan with prioritized actions that again center around stakeholder workshops and a public listening session. So stakeholders get together to talk about the hazards that might impact their community, and then they identify vulnerabilities and strengths in town and talk about how they might reduce those vulnerabilities or increase those strengths through different actions that they'd like to take. And then they prioritize those actions into a plan. And then those actions, again, are eligible for action grant funding. Here are some of the deliverables from the planning grant process. So on the left-hand side, you'll see a matrix that is part of that community resilience building process and helps define those actions at the workshop. And then in the top right is an example from one municipality's plan where they prioritized a few actions. So you can see the types of actions that are listed there. And then in the bottom right, this is a map, and maps play a key role in these stakeholder workshops, overlaying hazard data with different assets in town, different demographic information. Community members kind of mark them up with their own local expertise on where things are located and where flooding has occurred in the past and things like that. And it helps kind of stimulate discussion around those actions that they'd like to take. This slide shows just some kind of high-level data based on the over 200 planning reports that we've received into our office, and talks about kind of what communities are focusing on during these planning grant workshops. So in terms of hazards, the #1 hazard in those plans that is talked about is inland flooding. Again, this is sort of the whole state. So if you looked at just the coastal communities, the #1 hazard would be coastal flooding there. But communities often talk about severe winter storms, other severe weather and drought. And then in terms of top vulnerabilities, those include stormwater management, transportation, infrastructure and mobility, natural resources, and emergency management and preparedness. And then some of the top actions kind of map onto those vulnerabilities, which makes sense, but also looking for more risk assessments and data and maps on which to kind of assess the situation and what actions they'd like to take, just do some further investigation there. And then also regulation, zoning, and policy changes for climate resilience is another top action. And I always like to just pause on one kind of exemplary MVP planning process. In Amherst, Massachusetts, which is in the western part of Massachusetts, they did a really great job of kind of involving the whole diversity of their community in these workshops, which is really key to getting a good output that really reflects the whole community's priorities. So they actually hired someone from the community to conduct targeted outreach in an environmental justice community. They also made sure that their meetings and events were really accessible, including budgeting for food and childcare, as well as translation and interpretation services. And also made sure that meetings were really held in central and convenient and familiar locations so that people could join and feel comfortable expressing their ideas and opinions. So that was a really great product, and they now are doing an action grant with us as well. And now I'll talk a little bit more about action grants. So when I talk about action grants, I always like to start with this slide with our MVP core principles. So this is what we're really looking for in action grant projects. And this is actually what our scoring criteria for action grants is based on. So whenever a municipality is thinking about a project and whether it might be competitive for an action grant, which have gotten more and more competitive over the years, we always like to kind of talk to them about the MVP core principles. So I'm not going to go through all of them now, because there's 9 of them, but I will talk about a couple of them that are kind of cornerstones of the MVP program. The first is that we prioritize nature-based solutions, or those solutions that leverage nature for its intrinsic kind of climate resiliency benefits and co-benefits. And then we also prioritize projects that are proactive, as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. So proactive solutions that are supported by climate data. We also prioritize projects that have robust community engagement. That's a key part of the MVP program, as well as those that improve outcomes for environmental justice communities in particular. And then we also finally prioritize actions that are regional in nature, because we know that climate change does not respect jurisdictional boundaries. And so we need to be taking action together. And here's just some of the project types for the action grant. You can see it kind of encompasses all kinds of different projects, which again, I'll give you a flavor of what some of those are in a couple slides, but we fund planning, assessments, capacity building, and regulatory updates. We also fund design and permitting projects and construction and on-the-ground implementation. When I'm talking about on-the-ground implementation, I'm talking about kind of tangible projects that aren't necessarily construction. So we allow for land acquisition for climate resiliency, installing energy resilience projects at critical facilities, planting trees around town. Those types of projects would fall under this category. So here are some examples of kind of local success stories. And so this is one of the points in the topic of this particular presentation for the plenary. So this group of communities in Western Massachusetts are completing a regional assessment of the vulnerabilities of rural dirt roads to climate change impacts and doing a pilot project around that. They're also doing a lot of community engagement within their 3 communities. And I know a lot of the communities, other communities in Western Mass are really looking to this project because dirt roads are a key part of the infrastructure in Western Mass still. So definitely looking at this project and its pilot potential for other communities as well. In Boston, we helped them develop their first ever resilient building design guidelines so that development in the future floodplain is prepared for at least 3 feet of sea level rise. And so this kind of is a representative of one of those kind of regulatory projects that had a lot of proactive pilot potential here as well. Then a great example of a nature-based solutions project in Northampton, Massachusetts, which is again toward the west in Massachusetts. So they actually acquired a golf course, and then they used MVP grant funding to remove the drainage infrastructure, restore the golf course, get rid of its golfing components, and also plant lots of trees. And so now this parcel can really soak up the increased rain that they're expected to see due to climate change, instead of the rain running off of it into the neighboring communities and landscapes. So that's a really interesting project going on there. Again, I mentioned that we do allow for land acquisition with our funding. So in Mattapoisett, they purchased, that's a coastal community, they purchased 120 acres of forest, streams, and freshwater wetlands and coastal salt marsh, and were conserved it and are preventing development in vulnerable areas that way. And that land's also going to be serving as a buffer for storm surge and sea level rise. So great project there as well. In Malden, I always like to point this out. This is in kind of Metro Boston area. They are doing a really, really great job with community engagement and including environmental justice communities really from the beginning of the planning process through the entire project. So that's really great and something that we like to see in MVP projects. So they're redesigning their public works yard, both as a green space for the community that doesn't have a lot of access to that river. And that river also has just experienced a lot of neglect over the years. And they're also kind of promoting putting in green infrastructure and different things for climate resiliency in that parcel as well. And this whole project is really run by a community coalition of community leaders of color, youth, environmental advocates, and government stakeholders that formed a steering committee and led this community-based planning and design process. And they're more in the final stages of design now. So that's really great. And then finally in Belchertown, which is also in Western Massachusetts, they're constructing a replacement water storage tank that will increase the storage capacity and resiliency to drought. They're also installing green infrastructure near the tank, developing water conservation strategies, and completing a feasibility assessment of a rainwater harvesting system at the high school there, because currently the high school uses a lot of water to irrigate their athletic fields. So they're trying to come up with an alternative to that. So this really kind of holistic approach to water conservation and combating drought is really interesting, great project to feature. So if you want to look a little bit more at some of the action grant projects that we've funded, we have a webpage devoted to that with the link at the bottom here. But we have descriptions of all the projects that we've funded, as well as all of the deliverables that we've received to date so that others can learn from those projects. And then this is my contact information, as well as our kind of overarching MVP program website, which is new and includes a lot of program information, as well as some toolkits on topics of interest, like equity and environmental justice, nature-based solutions, and some of the other topics that I talked about today. So definitely click around there and let me know if you have any questions. But thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, Kara. I can see why you're the MVP. I really enjoyed hearing about that golf course project. And now to tell us what's going on in Kansas, we have Tara Lanzrath. Tara Lanzrath is the floodplain mapping coordinator for the Kansas Department of Agriculture, Division of Water Resources. She has a bachelor's degree in environmental studies with a minor in geography from the University of Kansas. Currently, she serves as project manager for contractual flood hazard studies under the CTP program while assessing mapping needs for the state of Kansas. In recent years, her focus has been on 2D base level engineering, BLE, to identify technical assistance projects early in the risk map project. In a broader sense, Tara has focused on using GIS for various water resources issues in Kansas, ranging from groundwater hydrology to riverine flooding, and has worked for the state of Kansas since 2008. In her spare time, she enjoys outdoor exploring, and she and her son visit national parks every year. And she's got I think you have a vacation in a national park coming up next week, Tara. So let's hear your presentation.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to my presentation on following the 2D BLE Brick Road to Technical Assistance. Now, you may be wondering if there's something wrong with your eyes or your screen when you look at my first slide here, but really what I've done today is gone with a Wizard of Oz theme. I couldn't resist the temptation finding out that I was in a plenary session with Mr. Paul Osman and going with an Wizard of Oz theme today. So my name is Tara Lanzrath, and I'm the Floodplain Mapping Coordinator with the state of Kansas. And I'm excited to be here today to talk to you guys about the initiative we've done with 2D base level engineering modeling and how that's led to technical assistance. So I'm going to start off by giving you a status of effective floodplain maps in Kansas. As you can see, we have about 27,000 stream miles in 42 counties that are currently unmapped. In these, we also have 70 community-based paper maps and 17 countywide paper maps. And so what we've wanted to do is bring floodplain mapping to areas of Kansas that do not have mapping currently and modernize the firms across the state. And this approach has felt somewhat sudden, essentially like a tornado, as far as how quickly we redid our efforts and revitalized our program. And so you can see here that this was an effort with our 2D modeling that took us to some place that is great, somewhere over the rainbow, as I would like to describe it. And so you can see here, one of our technical assistance projects resulted in some augmented reality visualization. This was done by Wood Environment and Infrastructure for one of our technical assistance projects in Garden Plain, Kansas. So what you're seeing here is visualization with and without mitigation efforts. And so this is really a powerful tool that you can use with some of the 2D modeling products to visualize how flooding occurs and how it can be lessened with mitigation. Also within this visualization, you will get information such as the depth of flooding that can be seen here shortly in this video as illustrated there. And so really with 2D modeling, we have really changed the way that we're doing floodplain modeling in the state. And I'm excited to be here to talk to you about how we went down this road today. So I'm going to start with talking about how we first got started with 2D modeling by giving you some information on what 2D base level engineering is. So as you may know, base level engineering is an initial zone A quality floodplain mapping. And with 2D modeling, we are able to now show the movement of floodplain waters in multiple directions. So we're no longer limited to that linear computation in the 1D modeling world. And so you can see there on the right, the grid cells and the mesh that was used or is used in 2D modeling to allow for that multiple direction of water movement. And so we use break lines to realign and resize these mesh cells along features such as roadways and stream banks. And I will be talking a little bit more about the importance of those a bit later in the presentation. One of the great things about 2D modeling is it also shows pluvial flooding. So flooding that's associated with rainfall that's not necessarily connected to the stream flooding. And so therefore you can see more localized flooding events that we were not able to capture with 1D modeling alone. So really what we've done is we've modified our risk map process. I know there's a lot on that slide. I don't expect you to read all of that, but essentially the message I want to get across is that you can see the 2D base level engineering product at the onset of a project. So we're going into the projects with being able to show the results from this initial 2D modeling and base level engineering runs. So in discovery and kickoff, we're showing this information to the community officials. And we're also moving that resilience focus that would typically occur at the end of the project up to the beginning of the project and focusing on technical assistance early in the risk map process. So if you remember that initial slide I showed you with the status of the floodplain maps, this is all the work that we've been doing to update that. So you can see that we're really busy, that our 2D initiative is pretty much a statewide footprint, and we've completed the funding for all of that. You can see here, we have completed the base level engineering for these areas with these lines here. And we are initiating the next phase of data development in all these counties that are green. And then in the orange counties, we are at the draft stage and have had flood risk review meetings now. The one thing that we do is we get comments on the base level engineering, and we use that to enhance our scope for data development. Other areas are further along in the process, as shown in the purple areas here in blue. And you can see the footprints for all of the custom watersheds that we've created. And that's where all the 2D modeling work will occur. Each custom watershed is composed of several HUC 8 watersheds. And we did that so that we could cover more area at once with the modeling. But each custom watershed consists of several different smaller sub-basins that have their own models. And so there's one overall model for the custom watershed, but it consists of several smaller models. And one thing to keep in mind is when you do this type of modeling that you do not want the watershed boundaries to overlap or to cut off any in between any cities. You want a city to be within one watershed and not split amongst two different watersheds. So that's something that we had learned with this process as well that's important to keep in mind. So the benefits of base level engineering, we are providing the data to communities sooner for review. So again, we're bringing this data to them early in the risk map process. And you can see there on the right-hand side of the screen that we have comment-enabled web maps for all of our base level engineering projects, where the user can go in and draw a box around the area that they want to leave a comment and then fill out the box that comes up and submit that to us. We offer a 30-day commenting period after discovery, essentially, and then we respond to those comments, and that really helps us enhance our scope for the next stage of data development, make sure we get our budget right. And what we also do is identify technical assistance projects early, so we're already looking to identify those projects here at this stage of the process. One of the other resources that we have offered in the state of Kansas is the base flood elevation portal. So what we do is we take all of that base level engineering data and those grids that are generated from that product we load that into our base flood elevation portal and for zone A BFE determinations. We also have a statewide LiDAR data set. And what the portal does is it will automatically extract the highest elevation from the BLE data and then that lowest elevation from the LiDAR data from the user generated polygon. And that will return that in a PDF letter template to give them that information, which can be important for things such as letter of map amendment determinations and things like that. So since we launched the portal in October of 2017, we've had roughly 500 registered users and over 1,000 BFE requests in the system. So this is a highly successful project that we have implemented, and it's well received among community officials and surveyors in Kansas. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is some considerations when you're doing 2D modeling. One thing to keep in mind is if you have multiple contractors that are working on your products, that it might be a good idea to put together some guidance on what you expect from the 2D modeling efforts. This is important for creating consistency among your floodplain mapping products. So you can also have each contractor review each other's work through the independent technical review process. That is really helpful for identifying different methodologies that each contractor is using. So I want to go into an example here of 2D modeling and the importance of enhancements in the data and the level of detail. So on the far left there, you can see an example of 2D modeling that uses no break lines. And so the model is not representing the road or railroad embankments, and the water is just passing right through those cells. So you might get a comment such as, there was a 2019 flood event here, but those individual flooding pools were connected in a larger flooding pool. So you could get the comment that this doesn't look accurate. So in that middle image there's an enhancement that includes the addition of break lines. What this does is it does allow water to back up behind the embankments, but it doesn't have a way to let that water pass through, so the water is ponding too much. An example of a comment there could be, you're crazy. This could never happen in reality. So that's a comment that we could see there. And finally, on the far right, this example shows the use of break lines in the model and the use of hydro connectors. So you're allowing that water to back up behind the embankments, but you're also allowing it to continue downstream through the existing culverts and bridge structures in place. And so you might get a comment here of, wow, this is exactly what happened. So I show you this just to illustrate the importance of enhancements in your 2D models and how the use of break lines and hydro connectors is important to getting accurate modeling results. Similarly, you can look at your land use layers. So an example there on the left is a more generalized land use covered data set. And that might result in a floodplain map that looks more like the top right image there. But what you can do is you can enhance your land use layer as shown on that image to the left now. And when you do that, you can get a more accurate depiction of flooding as shown in that bottom right image. So this is just a high level overview of how enhancements in the modeling can make your floodplain maps more accurate and believable with the community officials. And that's really important to creating believable map products when we're doing floodplain mapping. Wanted to talk a little bit about something that we encountered to be aware of. If you have a lot of levees like we do in the Midwest, base level engineering does not model these well. And so the example that's shown here is from one of our web viewers for the base level engineering data. It's showing Halstead, Kansas. And we actually went to or had a Zoom meeting presenting the data like this. And so the issue is that Halstead really has an accredited levee. And so when they saw this and all this area of red increase, they basically thought we were going to be adding the whole town into the floodplain. I assure you that's not the message we meant to send. And I definitely got a lot of calls that week having to explain that what this data was and how it's showing flood risk that isn't taking into consideration that levee. But really it may have been better to show it like this because we're not really going to be changing the regulatory maps in Halstead. And so this would have probably caused them a lot less heartache over the seeing of that whole area in red. It's not to say that a levee couldn't fail. And so that's something you could consider. You can consider symbolizing the area as a levee fail advisory. That might have been a better approach, but we certainly got their attention and then it could explain what we were doing here. So I say that just to have you consider your purpose for the BLE and your level of detail that's needed for an area. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about our technical assistance projects. So in recent years, we have offered technical assistance to communities, and we really enjoy doing this because it offers the opportunity for us to give something back to the communities rather than just us coming there and saying that we're updating their regulatory flood insurance rate map. We can offer them some assistance. And so we've had funding available through our CTP grant in recent years, and we can allocate these technical assistance projects as they become known or identified in our 2D modeling efforts. One of the tools that you can use with 2D modeling is animations for education and outreach. So this is a really great way to show how flooding occurs in a community, as you can see there with that visualization. 2D deliverables are water surface elevation grids like we use in our base flood elevation portal, depth grids that we used in that augmented reality. And velocity grids is another product that can be derived from these 2D models that are really powerful tools to use. I mentioned earlier about our Western Kansas hydrology technical assistance. And if you're interested in learning more about that, we did have an ASFPM session on that, and that was in F3 on Wednesday. And so really what we were doing here is looking at how to better map or model the areas out west where there's a lot less rainfall and where the stream flow has significantly declined due to groundwater aquifer pumping. And so if you're interested in that, I suggest you check out that session. It's going to look at an example for how to do this with a gauge record and then how to do it more on a watershed wide level to more accurately represent the floodplains in those areas, taking into consideration those unique factors that exist there. So for that project, we used Dodge City and then near Atwood, Kansas as the example. So we had a bit of a Wild West theme on that, since Dodge City is known as where the West begins in the nation. So that was a way to try to make that a little bit fun too. So check it out if you have time. Other projects we've done, you can see there on that map across the state. And a lot of our project types are modeling infrastructure improvements to see reductions in that special flood hazard area. We've also used some of the velocity grids with 2D modeling to look at stream bank stabilization or identifying areas that are more susceptible to erosion. You can also do things such as benefit cost analysis, structure-based risk assessment. Those sorts of things can be useful for additional grant applications. And then, things like the augmented reality that were shown in the beginning of the presentation as well. So again, ideally, we want to perform technical assistance early in the risk map process. And this is because we really would like to see some on-the-ground mitigation actions before new regulatory flood insurance rate maps come out. So we know that new maps take years to complete. And so really trying to get these projects identified early and getting something on the ground would be ideal. We have a website for technical assistance projects where you can go to find out more about individual projects. There's reports and maps available on our website. There's also a fillable request form there that we send community officials to if they want to initiate a project. And remember, with these projects, we cannot fund improvement projects itself. So it's more of the engineering analysis or education and outreach components. But the idea is that we'd like to increase our coordination with the Kansas Division of Emergency Management on any future BRIC grant applications. So I want to talk here at the end a little bit about the future directions. So we have a crystal ball view here. And so again, wanting to increase that coordination with KDEM on BRIC applications. I've also requested a grant writing workshop through CERC contractor to help assist in learning how to get some of these technical assistance projects to that next level. Also looking at what FEMA is going to do with 2D models moving forward, looking at more probabilistic modeling or future of flood risk data. We've essentially created like the statewide data set. It's like a living model that can be updated over time to show how mitigation can change the flooding and to show any future conditions modeling. And so really curious to see where that goes. And we're also looking to develop a model download system so that users can go in and download these models as well as perhaps run the models more efficiently. So we're exploring options for that currently as well. And so with that, that is all I had prepared for you today. There is my contact information. If you have any questions, feel free to follow up with me. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the presentation today as we went down the BLE Brick Road to technical assistance, and thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Tara. I'm proud to find out what's going on in the great state of Kansas. And we have about 15 minutes now for a Q&A session for all three of our speakers. And since we were originally scheduled at 20 minutes, we only got 15, so we're just going to jump right into it. Paul, this first question is for you. How can volunteer labor hours be captured accurately for use by the community later as part of the PA match money? The paperwork to record the hours can be difficult. Any ideas on how to streamline the process to easily gain this credit?
So the second half of that question, the answer is no. I have no idea how to streamline the process and make it easier. The first part of that question is there was a session right before this where they focused on that. And there actually is there's a lot of information, a lot of materials out there to help chapters, help states document those hours. Louisiana has done an excellent job. Florida has a great video on how to do that. And eventually on that ASFPM dartboard, we're going to have templates and materials to help chapters and states do just that.
All right. Kara, this next question is for you, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit because there have been more than one person that asked a similar question, but basically they want to know about your $10 million funding and what the source is.
Yeah, great question. So it's from a bond bill, the 2018 environmental bond bill to be specific. I had a link on one of my slides, but feel free to follow up if you want a link to that.
All right. And Tara, one of these questions, they asked you, how long did it take to create 2D models for the entire state of Kansas? And while they're asking about 2D models, somebody else asked if you were doing it through the CTP program.
Yes, it is done through the CTP program, and we began funding the development of the 2D models for base level engineering in FY18, and we finished that in FY20. So the effort has been fully funded, and we are just starting to do the remaining watersheds out in Western Kansas. So hopefully we'll have that initial effort complete later this year.
All right, back to Paul. So Paul, a couple of people have asked about this, the 8 states we're going to do pilot projects, and one person asked if you would be willing to do 9.
We're open to 9. The 8
That-
states, yeah, the 8 states are not cast in stone at this point. But what we initially thought was that there's 5 states that have really good disaster teams right now. So that's 5 of them right there. And what we'd like to do is ensure that sense of uniformity and consistency amongst all the teams. And we thought it'd be easier to take those 5 teams that already exist and try to find common denominators, common ground amongst us. The other remaining 3, we tried to pick states from across the nation that have both geographic representation, you know, West Coast, East Coast, but also the type of flooding. So we want to make sure that we address coastal flooding, arid regions flooding, urban flooding, those sorts of things. But yeah, those states have not been cast in stone, and we are open to suggestions. So.
All right. So back to Kara. Ms. Kara, of the communities that apply to MVP program, what percentages of the applicants came from less resourced communities?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't done an analysis recently, but pretty much all of the ones that are applying in the most recent rounds are from less resourced communities. We found that those are some of the later adopters for kind of obvious reasons. So doing kind of special outreach there and having our regional coordinators really stationed in different regions in Massachusetts, providing technical support and helping with recruitment has been really helpful for getting more of those on board. So we do have, as I mentioned, 89% participation. So a lot of those are from some of our smaller communities.
And Tara, are your floodways in 2D?
No, not yet. We still do our floodways and when we do data development in 1D, but we are excited about the guidance coming out on 2D floodways and incorporating those soon.
Okay. And this question rose through the top. It got a lot of likes, and it was, what recommendations does ASFPM have for DARTs to track socioeconomic and demographic information about the communities they assist? This transparency is important to ensure equitable assistance.
Yeah,
Obviously,
so
all the communities.
So a lot of this, again, I talked about state autonomy. So ASFPM at the national level is not going to be able to address a lot of those local and state-based issues. And all the floodplain managers on this call know that damage assessments, they're a tough nut to crack, especially in vulnerable population. You know, lower income properties are easier to red tag. They hit that 50% threshold pretty easily. But at the same time, you have to apply those regulations consistently across the community. There's no exemption. So the best things that communities can do is some upfront work and be ready before the disaster and have the pieces together to address those issues. So outreach and awareness programs, so people are aware of the substantial damage regulations and they're ready for them after the event. There's nothing worse than having to tell people that their house is substantially damaged after they've been flooded. Anybody who's gone through that knows that it's horrible. Pre-planning mitigation alternatives, start working on those mitigation alternatives and mitigation plans up front. The fact that it takes 5 or more years to do a mitigation program is criminal in my mind. But if you get those pieces in place before the disaster, it helps to expedite that process a little bit. And it makes it a little bit easier to cross that bridge from substantial damage to mitigation. And the last thing I'll talk about too is we need to do a better job at looking at some of the parachutes to be able to cross that bridge. Those folks are going to be out of their houses. So you have to find some way to address the temporary housing and all those sorts of kind of social parachute issues. We need to do a much better job of addressing those before the disaster. And I'll put a little shameless plug in right now for CRS. There's a brand new CRS program, a credit that just came out this year that gives you credit for doing all those things, for doing, addressing the mitigation issues up front and having an outreach program for substantial damage and putting together your list of properties and structures that have the potential to be substantially damaged, putting together your team and having a pre-planned event, pre-planned process for doing substantial damage, having mutual aid teams, all that stuff now gets CRS credit. So again, it's stuff that communities really need to do up front instead of after the event. Sorry for the long-winded answer, Steve.
CRS post-disaster plan?
It's the CRS substantial damage plan, correct?
All
Yep.
right.
Activity 510.
And your comments on mitigation lead well into this next question from Ms. Kara. So MVP has been very helpful for hazard mitigation plan updates. Biggest challenges will be keeping up with the funding needed to implement so many worthy action grant proposals. Kara, could you please share any thoughts, plans, or hopes you have for Massachusetts to address this gap?
Yeah, that's a great question and something we're always thinking about. We consistently get a lot more requested in funding than we are able to give out. But we're getting a lot of really great projects in the pipeline. And also we always try and kind of share our project ideas among other grant programs, both at the state or the federal level, for example, to see how we might be able to get more of those projects funded beyond just the MVP program. So I would say kind of stay tuned. We're always looking for ways to expand the funding for this program.
All right. Well, I wish you luck with it. And Tara, I have somebody who wants to know how long it took to do 2D models for the entire state of Kansas. And I know, but I'll let you answer.
So I may have answered that one already, but we had started in FY18 and then finished funding in FY20. And each model, it's each like custom watershed, the modeling process probably takes about 9 months to do each one for the BLE modeling.
Okay. All right. And Paul, not surprisingly, you had the most questions because whatever.
It was the most confusing.
Yep. Let me get back to this. I'm jumping between two screens. Has DART been deployed for an event that damaged buildings in the special flood hazard area, even though the event wasn't flooding, like a tornado, for example?
Yeah, so everybody knows that substantial damage has to be done for all disasters, tornado, fire, hurricane, alien attack, zombies. It doesn't matter. You have to do substantial damage. The short answer is I'm not aware of any states that have done disaster team deployments for any disasters other than a flood, but it's certainly an option. I mean, again, damage assessment applies to all damages, no matter what the source. So,
okay. And in a related question, it was asked if DART teams have assisted in adjacent states, traveled outside their own state.
Not yet. There has been EMAC deployments across the state. So certain states have requested individuals through EMAC, but there's not been a whole team deployment that I'm aware of yet. That's what we're working on.
All right. Kara, there was somebody who had asked about one of your slides. It showed a 10.8 degrees Fahrenheit increase, and the questioner wanted you to clarify the source of that.
Yeah, definitely. So I pulled that from our state hazard mitigation and climate adaptation plan, but those are from some downscaled projections for Massachusetts from the Northeast Climate Science Adaptation Center data. And so they, I think they average them across emission scenarios, but happy to follow up on further details on that particular number.
All right. And Paul, more than one question related to this. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but is ASFPM going to create any kind of certification similar to CFM for people who are qualified to respond as DART members?
Again, as I mentioned in the presentation, we want to have some autonomy within states because every state has a different process for doing that. Some states require that they be CFMs. Other states don't have that requirement. So again, within the state, there's going to be some autonomy on that. But what we want to ensure is that each one of those states has a good, uniform, consistent method. So if we do deploy through interstate, that we're all doing the same process and we all have the same professionalism.
All right. And Paul again, yep. So Stacy commented that it sounded like a lot of the costs are being covered by the volunteers themselves. And she's asking if all of the costs are covered by the volunteers.
So a lot of the states, again, goes back to state autonomy. A lot of the states, it's done strictly through volunteer. All the states that we've talked to, they all have a reimbursement process, but most of them haven't utilized it. Like Louisiana, some of you that heard Shandy this morning, they have reimbursement process, but the other floodplain managers simply do it out of the goodness of their heart. Same with Illinois and Oklahoma and the other states. Reimbursement processes are established through that middle and top tier that we talked about. So if it's an MOU that's through the state EMA, usually there's reimbursement built into that. And certainly when you get to that top of the tier with intrastate, through EMAC, that the reimbursement process is already built into that framework as well. So the short answer is at the lower level, often it's not needed, but at the middle and top tiers of that pyramid, there are reimbursement frameworks already built.
All right. Tara, someone's asking if risk rating 2.0 will use 2D BLE data to assess risk for a structure in the future.
Good
I
question.
don't think you can answer that.
I don't think I know the answer.
It's really an insurance question. Yeah, risk rating 2.0 has been a big topic and it's sneaking in again. All right. Will the DART teams be community driven and reflect local needs and perspectives? How much voice do host communities have and how the DART teams operate in their community?
So the short answer, since we're running out of team, is yes, and local communities will have a lot of input into that. I mean, this is a local community that's requesting the DART team. So they are going to manage, administer, oversee the team. The team's there to help the local community.
All right. That's about all the time we have questions for. I only got to about half of the questions that were posted in the chat, and I'm sorry to everybody who didn't get their questions answered. I'd like to say that thank you for attending this plenary, and we invite you to attend ASFPM's 46th annual conference in Orlando, Florida.
Good afternoon, ASFPM 2021. I hope you've enjoyed the conference this year. My name is Del Schwalls, and I'm in sunny Orlando, where I live. And on behalf of the Florida Floodplain Managers Association, I want to officially invite you to come to Orlando next year for ASFPM 2022. I'm sure many of you were at the ASFPM National Conference in 2009 when it was last in Orlando. And like me, you had a great time. Well, you ain't seen nothing yet. As you saw in the opening video, we have so many brand new attractions and rides at our world-class amusement parks. And that may be the only thing that you know about Orlando. But as us locals can tell you, Walt Disney World, Universal Studios, and the other parks are only a small part of what makes us the city beautiful. Let's check out some of the other things Orlando has to offer. Downtown Orlando is built around beautiful Lake Eola, which is surrounded by open spaces, parks, running paths, and recreational areas. Our extremely walkable downtown area is built around being pedestrian friendly. And with our fantastic Lynx bus service, our thriving army of Lyft and Uber drivers, and FFMA's plans for our shuttle services, during the conference, getting around will not be an issue. Downtown is full of amazing restaurants, bars, and dance clubs, museums, and other phenomenal local industry like our thriving brewing industry. So whether you're enjoying a fantastic meal in a restaurant patio overlooking Lake Eola, or walking through our streets of our hipster-esque Thornton Park, full of shops and pubs, you will quickly fall in love with Orlando. And don't forget to check out the nightlife as you enjoy areas like Wall Street Plaza, full of a variety of restaurants, bars, and live music venues, or Church Street Station, a brick-lined haven for foodies and all you beer connoisseurs alike. And since you bring your families and friends to this vacation, check out our museums and our performing art theaters as well, not to mention the Amway Center. So get ready for Orlando.
Hello, everybody. I'm Cece McKiernan, Executive Director of the Florida Floodplain Managers Association.
Hi, I'm Josh Overmeyer, Chair of FFMA.
I'm Sally Cook, Education Director of FFMA, and we can't wait to see you
next year. The ASFPM conference venue for next year, the Caribe Royale, has just been renovated.
It has plenty of space for everyone.
We could fit a lot of CFM exam takers there.
You can even look out the window in your bathrobe.
They've recently undergone a total renovation of all the guest rooms. Nice comfy beds, they've added wet bars, and some of the villas even have kitchens.
I bet we're going to have some great food. I wonder if they have a Royale with cheese.
Well, I can't wait to slide down that water slide.
And Del, you don't want people floating around in the pool. They might get caught, but.
That's right. Make sure you're checking out our receptions as well, but bring your families to this fantastic tourist vacation.
It'll be great to see everyone again as we give you the Royale treatment in Orlando.
See you in 2022.